Hello again, I'm Dan Fleisch, and this video is about college exams. As with many of the topics in this series, there are hundreds of college help books, videos, and websites that deal, at least in part, with exams. And you may find some of those helpful if you'd like a more comprehensive treatment than I can give in a 7-minute video. But in this video, I'll tell you what I think is the most important thing you can do to prepare for college exams, and I'll explain why I think it's important. I'll talk mostly about the kind of exams you take as part of a college class, but I'll also spend a few minutes giving you my thoughts on other types of exams, such as the qualifying exams you take as part of the admission process for graduate school or certain careers. For exams that are part of a class, I'm sorry to say that I don't think there's any one magic strategy that will guarantee success on college exams. If such a strategy exists, I certainly haven't found it. But in my 20 years of college teaching, it's become clear to me that most of the students who do well on exams have something in common. That something isn't just being smart, although intellectual ability can certainly help in academics in the same way that being able to run fast can help in athletics, or having quick reactions can help in driving a race car. But I've seen plenty of smart students do very poorly on exams, and I've also seen many less gifted students do very well. So I believe that raw intelligence is a contributive but not determinative factor for success on exams. I also believe that a more important contributive factor is the effort you put in, not in the few days leading up to the exam, but in the long days, weeks, and even months of the term. If you have the willpower to force yourself to make a sustained effort to learn the material, not in a frenzy of cramming at the last minute, but over the long haul, your chances for success on college exams are greatly increased. You can probably remember lots of times when you've heard other students, or maybe even heard yourself, saying something like, "I can't believe I did so poorly. I studied for 6 hours for that exam." Or maybe it's 2 hours, or 10 hours, or some other number. So why do students sometimes do poorly, even after a marathon pre-exam study session? I think the answer is that they should have been preparing for that exam all along during the term by keeping up with the reading, doing the homework, alone at first, and by taking and then restructuring their class notes. The math on this is actually pretty easy. Over the first, say, half term, your out-of-class study time should add up to something like 50 or 60 hours of effort. If you haven't put in that work, how can you possibly expect to make up for that lost time by studying for 6 or even 10, 15, 20, or 30 hours right before the midterm or final exam? It's hopeless. Even if you could somehow maintain your focus and concentration on one subject for that many hours on end, it still doesn't come anywhere close to the number of hours you should have been putting in during the previous weeks. Imagine an athlete who skips all their training sessions for weeks or months and then frantically tries to get in shape in the few days before a game. Or a musician who never practices and then tries to get ready for a performance by practicing non-stop for a day or two. That approach is never, ever going to work. So how in the world do we expect cramming for an exam to work? If you don't find these analogies compelling, here's another reason to do your preparation consistently during the term rather than trying to cram it in at the last minute. Research shows that you retain information far better if your learning is distributed over a longer period of time rather than one big block of hours. So, my recommendation for your exam preparation strategy is simple. You should be preparing for exams for the entire term. And here's a bit of tactical advice. If your professor gives out practice exams, or if you have access to previous exams that have been given in that class, remember that those materials can be very helpful or very dangerous. I say dangerous because I've seen lots of students fall into the trap of thinking that they'll be prepared for an exam if they know how to answer every question or work every problem on the practice or previous exam. I do sometimes hand out practice exams in my classes, and when I do, I always say, not a single one of these questions or problems will appear on the actual exam. So, what good are they? They can be useful for two things. First, for familiarizing yourself with the type of questions and problems you may face on the exam. And second, for checking whether you've studied to the appropriate level in preparing for the exam. In other words, you should use practice exams as a gauge of your preparation after you've done some amount of studying, not as a guide to point the direction before you study. Unfortunately, instead of using practice in previous exams like that, many students spend hours of their precious study time trying to answer the specific questions or work the exact problems on the practice or previous exams. Unless you happen to be in a class in which the instructor gives the same exams over and over, focusing your studying on mastering a previous exam is a recipe for failure. Okay, that's my advice for exams that are part of a class. What about standard exams and qualifiers? Just as in the case of class exams, cramming for a standard exam rarely pays off, and you'll be better off studying over an extended period of time before the exam date. But in this case, taking as many practice exams as possible can help, not because you'll face the same questions when you take the exam, although certain qualifying exams do reuse some percentage of the questions. But the real benefit of taking practice exams is that it's a good way to get comfortable with the mechanics of test taking and to familiarize yourself with the type of questions you might be asked. So, you should take practice exams under conditions as close to those of the actual exam as possible, including rigorously enforcing the time allotment for each section of the exam. One final thought. For any exam, knowing that you've put in the time to prepare yourself can have a big positive impact on your confidence, and there's a considerable body of research indicating that self-confidence can reduce stress and positively impact your performance on an exam. Of course, for that to work, your confidence has to be based on something real. If you just arrogantly assume that you already know everything without studying, that kind of self-confidence can work against you. But if your confidence is rooted in the knowledge that you've put in the time and effort to prepare yourself for the exam, instead of just cramming at the last minute, you can go into that exam with a realistic expectation of doing well. So, the time to get to work on exam preparation is now. Thanks very much for watching.